guys, it's Carissa and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be filming a January wrap-up where I tell you all the books that I read in January and how I felt about them all. January was a really good reading month for me. I read 5 books, all of them 3.5 stars or above. So I really enjoyed all the books that I did read. 2 of the books were science fiction, 1 was a high fantasy, 1 was nonfiction, and the other was literary fiction, possibly historical fiction. I'm not quite exactly sure where it fits. I want to say historical fiction. You tell me, okay? Alright, so the first book that I read in the month of January was Vicious by V.E Schwab, and I gave this book 4 stars. I'm not really good at giving summaries. I've discovered that I'm really bad at giving away spoilers. You can just ask my husband whenever I have a present for him for Christmas or his birthday or anything. I have a really hard time just keeping it a secret. So I'm going to give you just a little tiny bit of a summary. Might read a little bit of what's on Goodreads so I don't give anything away. But here we go. So on Goodreads for Vicious it says, Victor and Eli started out as college roommates, brilliant, arrogant, lonely boys who recognized the same sharpness and ambition in each other. In their senior year, a shared research interest in adrenaline, near-death experience, and seemingly supernatural events reveals an intriguing possibility that under the right conditions, someone could develop extraordinary abilities. But when their thesis moves from academic to the experimental, things go horribly wrong. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It was pretty fast-paced. It was easy to follow, easy to understand. I can't say that I loved any of the characters. This book is very morally gray. All the characters, none of the characters are good. But I like this book because it makes you think about what is good and what is wrong and right, and doing the wrong things for the right reasons or doing the right thing for the wrong it made me think a lot about the morally gray area in life in general. And so I really enjoyed that book. Another thing I really enjoyed about Vicious was how the story was told. Most of the story was told in flashbacks, where it starts out 10 years ago, and that's when they were at college. And then it goes to 3 weeks before now, and then it goes back to 10 years ago, and then it says 2 weeks before now, and then it goes back to 5 years ago. And so it jumps back forth through the past, but you're never at the present day until the very end of the book. So I really liked that. It gave me something to anticipate and look forward to, and it helped drive the story a little bit more that it was broken up like that. So I really enjoyed it. 4 stars. Solid. Not perfect, but pretty good. So the next book that I read in January was The Great Alone, written by Kristin Hannah. And I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. I cried through the entire last third of it. I felt like the characters were really well written. So the basic summary of The Great Alone is this family in 1974 moves to Alaska to get a fresh start. The father is a former POW from the Vietnam War, and so he definitely has some issues that need to be dealt with. The mother is somebody who would never leave her husband for anything. She would follow him everywhere. And then the main character that we mostly see her perspective is Lenny, who is a 13-year-old girl, and it shows her kind of growing up in Alaska as this teenager. Alright, so just a couple paragraphs of the summary from Goodreads. It says, at first Alaska seems to be the answer to their prayers. In a wild, remote corner of the state, they find a fiercely independent community of strong men and even stronger women. The long, sunlit days and the generosity of the locals make up for the Albrights' lack of preparation and dwindling resources. But as winter approaches and darkness descends on Alaska, Ernst's fragile mental state deteriorates and the family begins to fracture. Soon the perils outside pale in comparison to the threats from within. In their small cabin, covered in snow, blanketed in 18 hours of night, Lenny and her mother learn the terrible truth. They are on their own. In the wild, there is no one to save them but themselves. And I think that pretty much sums up the book pretty well. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved the characters. For this book, I do feel like the ending was a little bit too put together for me. but I still really enjoyed it and still gave it 5 stars, and I highly recommend this book. The third book that I read in the month of January was Lost Connections. This book was written by Johann, and he is a reporter, and when he was younger he was diagnosed with depression, and he was told, like most people in our generation, that it was a chemical imbalance in his brain, and they gave him some medication to fix it. Well, as he got older, he wanted to find out kind of the real reason for his depression because the medicine didn't seem to be working. So he went to scientists around the world and talked to them about depression and some of their findings and studies that they have done. And he's come to the conclusion that depression is not a chemical imbalance, but it's more environmental factors and how we need to connect deeper with ourselves and other people and the environment around us. Honestly, I really liked this book. I thought there were some great things in it, and I think that everybody can get something from what he wrote. I don't necessarily believe that throughout this book you can totally feel the author's bias about Big Pharma and how he thinks drug companies are just pushing drugs through and that they're not really doing anything and they don't really help anything and that depression isn't a chemical imbalance. But I don't really agree with him on that. So as long as you can get past that bias, then I think this is a really great book. And I do think there are some very valuable things in there that can help people who are feeling depressed or just down in general, even if it's not actual depression. I feel like this book could help you find ways just to reconnect, and I think that can be a big thing in people's lives. The fourth book I read this month was Elantris by Sanderson, and I gave it 4 stars. Now this year I am trying to read all the things Sanderson. He is my new current favorite author, so I just want to read as much of him as I can. And this is his first published work, so I figured that was a good place to start. On the Goodreads summary, part of it is, Elantris was the capital of Arleon, gigantic, beautiful, literally radiant, filled with benevolent beings who used their powerful magical abilities for the benefit of all. Yet each of these demigods was once an ordinary person until touched by the mysterious transforming power of the Shroud. 10 years ago, without warning, the magic failed. Elantrians became wizened, leper-like, powerless creatures, and Elantris itself, dark, filthy, and crumbling. Now, this story follows 3 main characters. One is the prince of a new capital called K, and in the very beginning of the book, he gets the Shroud and he gets thrown into the city of Elantris, and everyone thinks he's dead. The second perspective is from Princess Serene of Tiaud, and she was arriving to marry this prince, and he died before she got there, and so she became his widow, and she's trying to figure out a way to help her new home capital. The third perspective is from a high priest who has come to the capital to convert all of its people and claim it for his emperor and his god. I really enjoyed these characters. They took a little while to get used to and get to know, but once I did, I thoroughly enjoyed them and loved them. And from some perspectives, one perspective you might think one person is evil, but then you read the other person's perspective and you realize they're doing things for all the right reasons or what they believe to be good. The magic system isn't as complicated as some of his other magic systems. I feel like this one's pretty simplistic. You just write signs in the air, basically. But it doesn't seem to have any big holes in the magic system, which can be a bummer. So that was good. The magic system was at least thought out, even if it was simplistic. I kind of feel like the ending was a little bit too matched up. I feel like all the loose ends were tied. I just feel like it was a lot simpler of an ending than the book needed. Reading a lot more Brandon Sanderson, I know that he has definitely improved on that aspect with his endings. So I think even though I really enjoyed this book, the ending let me down just a little bit. I just felt like I needed something a little deeper than what he gave us. Still a really good read, 4 stars, recommend it. The last book that I read this month was Vengeful by V.E Schwab, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Now this is the second book in the Villains trilogy, I think. I read Vicious at the beginning of the month, and now Vengeful is the second one continuing on in that series. I kind of felt like this book let me down. I was expecting more from it since I read the first one so recently. I also felt like one of the characters was just really crude and crass. I don't feel like that's who she really was. I felt like V.E Schwab just wrote her in like that because she wanted a character like that. And so I don't think that really meshed as well as it was supposed to. But I still enjoyed it. It was still an enjoyable read. So 3.5 stars, nothing amazing, but it's definitely not a new favorite. Anyway, that's all the books that I read for the month of January. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that if you're interested, you will check some of these books out. Anyway, bye!